This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and this is the Bruichladdich 18 year. It's a relatively new addition to the range, and non-age statement Bruichladdich is usually very good. 7-8 year Bruichladdich, usually very good. So 18 year has to be great because older and bigger age statements are always better, right? My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. Okay, so it's 18-year age statement Bruichladdich, and it's presented in a very, what we now think of as a standard sort of Bruichladdich presentation. 50% ABV, non-chill filtered, no color added. So I can't talk about this bottle without talking about packaging. I don't talk a lot about packaging on the channel for a number of reasons. There's a number of problems, all that extra sort of packaging. The biggest reason is that it's not the bottle, it's the liquid inside that matters. But in this case, Bruichladdich has looked forward and tried to imagine a different way of presenting the packaging of the whiskey, a fairly sort of high-end, high-age statement whiskey, without, as we move past the canisters and boxes that are being phased out by a lot of distillers, including Bruichladdich. So what they've done is they have presented the glass bottle inside this recycled sort of cardboard shell that has sort of a clamshell and a buckle here where the logo is, that you can peel off and expose the glass bottle. You can peel off the top and access the stopper with this still intact. And I haven't removed this. I wanted to do it here for the first time with you, and it's basically a little buckle here that pops around a little knob, and it just opens up, exposing the bottle. And if you don't tear it, you can reuse it and reapply it, buckle it again, and now you've got a sunshade if it's on a shelf somewhere where the light's not going to get into it the way you might use the canister. So I have unveiled the glass bottle, which Bruichladdich says is made up of about 60% recycled glass, which is great. And if we compare it to the traditional sort of Bruichladdich bottle, these are both 750 ml bottles, and you can see that this one seems to have a much sort of smaller footprint. It's probably using less of that glass, so that's great. We've got more sustainability with this new sort of approach to the packaging. But more importantly, having exposed the bottle, I can now access the bottle code on the back. So like most bottles, this is gonna tell me the bottling date is gonna be October 24, 2023, but it also includes a 5-digit code. If I go onto Bruichladdic's website, it's going to ask me to enter that code, and I'm going to get a lot of information here. So my bottle came out of a vatting of 67 casks in total. Looks like it's 2 sets, and they were all distilled in 2004, and the barley's all from the Scottish mainland. So I think some of this 18 has some Islay barley in it. My bottle is all Scottish mainland barley. Okay, so then I also have some information about the cask configuration. So I have in my vatting, second fill bourbon barrels, first fill French Sauterne, it's Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc, and first fill port and Spanish Tempranillo Ribera del Duero second fill hogsheads. Then that's going into second fill bourbon barrels. Okay, that's the first batch. Second batch is very, very similar. So only 1/2 of my vatting has the Tempranillo influence. This whiskey has had plenty of time to breathe while I've gone through all this sort of introductory material. Let's see if the nose here on this whiskey is as great as the presentation of this whiskey so far. So I'm gonna go in on the nose on the 18-year Bruichladdich. 2 things are jumping out at me, and one is vanilla cream, honey, a lot of that bourbon cask kind of note that you expect. That's the sweetness, but it's also hot. And this is only 50% whiskey, which is, you know, significant, but it's you know, consistent across the board with these the way these Bruichladdich and Port Charlottes are presented. This one is a little abrasively hot, and I've also got that nail polish remover note hanging over this. Okay, so next layer down is the fruit, tropical or stone fruit, peaches, you know, not too sweet, nothing wrong with it. And the next layer down though is a little bit more vegetal rather than fruit. It's a little sharper. and it has an earthiness, a mineral kind of earth, but it's bleeding into the note that I'm finding. The more I go in on this, the more I look for the note at the bottom of the glass, what I'm finding is a sort of a sour, and what I think is that sort of lactic note that people talk about a lot with Bruichladdich. So I've reviewed a lot of kind of Bruichladdich and Port Charlottes on the channel. I don't really talk about this note that much because it doesn't really bother me in most of these whiskeys. And some people will be more sensitive, but there is this note that we talk about in Bruichladdich, this sort of butyric acid kind of lactic note that lends itself to some colorful descriptions. This is the note that you'll hear people describe as baby vomit, right? And at the bottom of this nose, I'm getting that sourness. But what I'm not getting is any offsetting sort of sweetness to balance it out. So I'm getting, as I try to really unpack the nose, all roads kind of lead back to that sort of sourness. And so it's not as welcoming as I would like it to be. So now we're gonna go in on the palate and find out how this is actually gonna present once we can get a taste. Very solid mouthfeel. You know, you have this 50% whiskey, very solid. Honey, black pepper. Again, from that heat, I'm getting a little bit of the heat. It's not a problem, but it's pretty prominent. The fruit's there. It's the same tropical kind of stone fruit. Very consistent. So not a lot of surprises here. A lot of follow through from the nose. I'm getting a lot of oak. I'm getting a good bit of bitter, sort of tannic. Let's go back real quick onto the finish. Got a nice bloom of sort of black sort of pepper. It's not like bracing. It's not very hot. I have a nice, decent sort of warmth kind of here, right in the center of my chest. Very subtle. There's nothing caustic about it. But I am getting that sort of plume, again, from the heat. I'm also getting that sour kind of fruit and the vanilla. And then it's sort of developing. So that's the first wave, and it's kind of, hey, you've heard these notes already from earlier, but then I'm getting that real sweet and sour kind of citrus, vegetal element that really sets up camp with the finish, because the finish is pretty long. I mean, I still have something going on here, but talking a little bit, and it's a nice length of finish. It is a lot of the bitter kind of tannic bitter that is staying with me, and it's a lot of the sort of sour kind of fruit element that is sort of not held in check by those other elements, the vanilla, sort of traditional casky elements. It's not wine cask tart berry like I expect. And we have this sort of just generally kind of sour, not tart, slightly off. And that's what's left as the finish has developed and as it recedes. I've got a combination of that, and I've got the sort of bitter cask. That's what's kind of left, even in the back of my sinus. It's very casky. It's very tannic. It's bitter, and I'm just not getting enough of those other elements to sort of balance it. Sometimes we get a whiskey, especially as a 50% whiskey, and sometimes if we add the water, we can open it up a little bit. We shave off some of the caustic elements, open up some new flavors, right? So I still have a pretty healthy amount, so I'm gonna give it a good bit of water, okay? From my experience, I'm actually gonna go in and give it one more. You know, 4 good little drops there. I'm gonna let that sit for a second, come back, and let's see what the water does. Peach vanilla. Still has some heat, less nail polish remover, but it still has the heat coming off of it, but it's much sweeter presentation here. Yeah, that little earthy mineral is there, but it's really improved overall. It's condensed it, I think it's simplified it, but it has done something to kind of shave off a couple of the things that I thought were a little less inviting on the nose the first time. So now let's see what happens on the palate. Okay, so don't add water to this whiskey. The palate, let's go back. Okay, the palate was the strongest part to begin with, yeah. Oh, wow. Still going on that finish. I want to talk about the palate, but this water has done anything to fix that finish. In fact, it has made it it has made it worse. But back on the palate, I'm getting more of an orange citrus with it. I'm getting the sweetness, which is nice. The pepper's there. It's not quite as strong. Palate is fine. Very, very drinkable. The palate really wasn't broken to start with. I think the water, you know, it's maybe made it a little easier. On the finish, sweetness is washed out. This is really the opposite of a lot of whiskeys. Every whiskey is different. We're playing with chemistry when we're adding the water. But what I'm getting so much more now is all cask. I'm getting so much of that bitter element. These are the things I was hoping to kind of shave off. Yeah, as it sits, it's just sour. It's just sour. It's not quite grapefruit because it's not like acidy or citrus sour, but it's like sour fruit and really casky. Just tannic, just oaky, kind of bitter, and the sweet elements that were there on the finish before have been kind of washed away, and the finish has really degraded. It's done the exact opposite of what I'd hoped the water would do, which was shave down and turn down the volume on some of the notes that I didn't care for and bring me some new notes. So here's the part where I disclosed to you that I first encountered this whiskey in a blind tasting flight that was set up by someone else that I had no idea what was in the flight. Okay, and it was a pretty impressive Bruichladdich flight with one curveball in it to sort of keep me honest. And the whiskeys in this flight were Octomore 14.2, Bruichladdich 18, I know, right? Port Charlotte heavily peated, and the Leche Sinclair. And I blind tasted these whiskeys without knowing what they were. It's not totally kind of a one-for-one. The Bruichladdich 18 was the only unpeated. So it definitely, you know, was going to stand out in that way. Not knowing what any of this was, I ranked the whiskeys in this blind flight: Octomore, Sinclair, Port Charlotte, and then this whiskey. And I ranked it dead last blind, not even knowing what it was. This tasting that I'm describing was more than 3 weeks ago. I've had this bottle. I have been dipping into it, trying it in trying different permutations, different quantity of water, letting it sit, trying it straight, you know, without letting it sit at all, just straight pour. It's been open quite a long time. The level is low. This whiskey's had plenty of chances, and this is where I come out on it. My feelings on this finish really haven't changed. So here we have a classic example of how numbers on the age statement do not directly equal that much more quality. So we would assume we have non-age statement Bruichladdich, we have 18-year Bruichladdich, that the 18-year Bruichladdich is going to be exponentially better than that non-age statement whiskey, right? It's not a bad whiskey. There's a lot going on here. It has complexity. It's got big, bold sort of presentation, big mouthfeel, big flavors, great transparency. It's not bad. And I've looked at some of the whiskeys. I gave like 3.5 glasses. This is better than that. It is. Even if I think it's a little out of balance, even if I think some of those elements are not held in check and are not doing the whiskey a favor, especially on that finish. So I'm gonna say 3 3/4 glasses is where I'm at. Okay, so now we can talk about value. And I've seen some, you know, reviewers and people talking about this whiskey and talking about how expensive it is and sort of talking about it being kind of overpriced, but I'm looking at 50% ABV, well-presented whiskey that's been 18 years in a warehouse. That's what it costs. This costs about $180 for a 750 ml US size bottle here in the US market, about. And when I look at other bottles with this age statement, Aberlour 18 year, 43%, poorly presented whiskey, it's $190, costs more. Balblair 18 is more than $200. Glenallachie 18 is more than $200. Talisker 18 year, $180 or so dollars, right in line with this. That's that sort of weird Talisker ABV, close to 46, but with the Diageo presentation. It's a good whiskey, but it's right in line in terms of the price. Then there are the outliers, and that's not what this one is. Bunnahabhain 18 costs more than $300 here in the US. And so when I look at these other whiskeys with this age statement, many of which are not going to stand up to the ABV on this one, I don't think this whiskey's overpriced. So I'm gonna leave the rating right where it is. I'm gonna leave it at 3 3/4. In this market, I honestly feel like Bruichladdich could easily have justified charging 10% more in this market with the 50% and the provenance and all that it has, and they haven't. So I'm not going to penalize the whiskey for the cost. I'm going to leave it right where it is. So I'm sure that my sort of review on this whiskey may have been a little unexpected. If you have thoughts, if you've had this whiskey, if you want to chime in and sort of add your take, let us know in the comments, and make sure that if you haven't, make sure you subscribe. Use this big button that's popping right over here. There's a lot more videos coming in the future. You don't want to miss them. I will see you on the next one.